A woman pushed open the tall ballroom doors just as the midnight orchestra shifted into a slow final waltz, and every noble head turned toward the woman standing breathless beneath the chandeliers. She should never have entered that palace again. Not after vanishing 3 winters earlier with a scandal powerful enough to ruin an entire bloodline. The scent reached him before her face did. Lavender. Soft enough to fool the court. Dangerous enough to stop a duke mid-step. Duke Ryson Valecourt slowly lowered the crystal glass in his hand while whispers spread through the ballroom like sparks across dry grass. The woman kept her gaze lowered beneath the lace shadow of her veil, but her trembling fingers tightened around the edge of her fan, the exact same way they once had on the night she disappeared from his estate without a word, without a farewell, and without the child everyone believed had died before birth. She had returned under another name, another title, another life, but she had made one mistake. She wore the same lavender perfume she once used to hide the scent of smoke after secretly visiting the Duke's forbidden West Wing. The very night his younger brother was found dead beside a burning corridor. And now he was walking toward her through a silent ballroom filled with nobles who still believed she was buried beside the old Chapel Hill. If you were standing in that ballroom, would you run from the Duke or finally tell him the truth after 3 years of silence? Drop your answer and tell me which beautiful part of the world you're watching from, because I truly love seeing where these stories reach. And if you enjoy emotional royal dramas filled with secrets, betrayal, and dangerous love, subscribe now, because this night is only the beginning, and I promise you, the Duke has not forgiven her at all. The ballroom did not move, yet it felt alive, holding its breath as if the walls themselves remembered her footsteps from years ago. Duke Ryson Valecourt did not rush. He never did when something belonged to his past, and suddenly returned without permission. Each step he took across the polished floor carried the weight of silence behind him. The orchestra faltered, sensing the shift in power rather than hearing any command. She stood near the far archway, half hidden by guests who suddenly forgot how to pretend they were not staring. The woman called herself Leora Sen, a name spoken only in distant invitations and newly forged court records. No one questioned it aloud. In aristocratic halls, curiosity was often more dangerous than ignorance. But he knew. Not because of her face alone. Not because of the way she held her chin slightly tilted away from direct attention. It was the lavender scent that betrayed her, subtle yet persistent, like a memory refusing to fade. 3 years earlier, that scent had lingered in the West Wing after a fire alarm that was never explained. And on that same night, his younger brother Calric had been found lifeless near the sealed corridor. She had disappeared before dawn. No farewell, no trial, no burial record, only silence. Now she had returned, as if silence could erase consequence. A woman in court uniform stepped forward quickly, blocking the Duke's path. Her name was Lady Brannock, a chaperone assigned to observe arrivals. She bowed too low, her voice trembling as she tried to announce Leora formally, but the Duke lifted one hand, and she stopped speaking immediately. He did not need introductions. The Duke's gaze stayed locked on her. Leora finally turned her head slightly. Not enough to invite attention. Just enough to acknowledge that she had felt him approach long before he stopped in front of her. 3 winters, he said quietly. The words did not echo. They cut. The surrounding nobles stepped back without being asked. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. Leora's fingers tightened on her fan. Your Grace misremembers. A lie spoken too softly to be convincing. Behind her, 2 young courtiers whispered. One of them, a nervous clerk named Harith Devane, nearly dropped the parchment he was holding. Beside him stood Captain Merrick Salt, a palace guard known for never speaking unless ordered. Even he shifted his weight uneasily. The Duke tilted his head slightly. "You wore that scent the night my brother died." The ballroom tightened again, like a rope pulled slowly around every witness present. A sharp breath escaped from someone near the marble columns. A noblewoman named Selfira Orne pressed her hand against her chest, as if trying to steady a memory she did not want to recall. Leora did not respond immediately. Instead, she lowered her gaze briefly, as if searching the floor for something lost. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "If you intend to accuse me, do so in proper court." A faint shift passed through the room. That was the first mistake she made, because she did not deny it. The Duke stepped closer, and the distance between them collapsed into something far more dangerous than proximity. "The court already judged you missing. Not innocent, not guilty. Missing." A pause followed, heavy enough to feel like thunder without sound. From the side gallery above, an elderly advisor named Lord Renshaw observed carefully, his fingers interlocked. He had served 3 monarchs, and recognized when history was about to change shape in real time. Leora's voice lowered. "Then why am I still standing here?" That question hung in the air longer than anything else spoken that night. The Duke's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because I allowed it." A flicker passed through her expression. Not fear, exactly. Something closer to restraint, breaking at its edge. Across the ballroom, a young nobleman named Taran Blith whispered to another guest that the Duke had lost all sense of decorum, but no one agreed. No one dared. The music tried to resume, but a single look from the Duke silenced it again. Leora finally lifted her eyes fully to meet his. For a moment, nothing else existed. Not the court. Not the witnesses. Not even time. Only recognition sharpened by years of unanswered questions. "You should not have come back," he said. "And yet I did," she replied. That exchange did not sound like an argument. It sounded like history, reopening a wound that never closed. A distant bell rang from the palace tower, signaling the final hour of the gathering, yet no one moved, because something far more important than the ceremony had begun. The Duke raised his hand slightly, and 2 guards shifted behind Leora without touching her. Not restraint yet. Warning. Her gaze flicked briefly towards them, then returned to him. "If you are planning to imprison me, you will need proof." A faint, almost unreadable expression crossed his face. "I already have it," he said. And somewhere deep in the palace, a sealed door that had remained locked for 3 years began to feel like it might open again. The Duke did not move, even after speaking, yet the entire hall felt as if something inside the palace had shifted into place. Leora's breathing slowed, controlled, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of memory she could not fully lock away. Behind the grand pillars, servants stopped pretending to work. Every ear in the room leaned toward the space between them. A sudden sound came from the upper gallery. Lord Renshaw had stood. "This matter should not remain within a ballroom," he said, voice aged but firm. "If the West Wing is to be mentioned, then so must the sealed testimony stored beneath the Crown archives." A ripple passed through the nobles. That archive was never spoken of openly. Leora's grip tightened again, but she did not look away from the Duke. "You are dragging ghosts into daylight." "Ghosts already walk here," he answered. From the far end of the hall, Captain Merrick Salt stepped forward without instruction. His expression remained unreadable, but his voice finally broke its silence. "Your Grace, permission to escort the witness to secure chambers until inquiry begins." The word witness struck harder than accusation. Leora turned slightly toward him. "I am not a witness to anything." The Duke's gaze sharpened. That is where you are wrong. A faint tremor moved through her posture, quickly controlled. For a moment, she seemed younger than her composed presence allowed, as if the weight of 3 years had returned in a single breath. Above them, a palace bell sounded again, shorter this time, signaling restricted protocol initiation. That sound meant only one thing. The royal seal had been opened somewhere within the palace grounds. Servants began to retreat in controlled urgency. Guests were no longer guests. They were witnesses under unspoken order. Leora finally spoke softer, almost to herself. If the seal is open, then someone else has decided tonight. The Duke stepped closer once more, his voice dropping so only she could hear. No one decides this, except the truth. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her eyes. Not fear of him, but fear of what truth might surface if the sealed corridor truly was reopened. A distant echo travelled through the palace walls, like a door unlocking far below stone. Guards moved closer, forming a controlled perimeter that did not touch her, but removed every possible escape path. The ballroom, once a place of celebration, now resembled a chamber of judgment held in silence. Leora kept her posture steady, though her hands betrayed slight movement against the fan she still held. The Duke finally turned his head toward Captain Merrick Salt. No escort. She walks under her own shadow. No chains, no display. Merrick bowed once and stepped back. That decision unsettled more than it reassured. It meant the Duke intended something far more precise than immediate punishment. He intended memory to lead the way. Leora exhaled slowly. You are taking me back there. The Duke did not deny it. Instead, he spoke quietly, almost like recalling a wound. You were the last person seen entering the West Wing before the fire alarms failed. You were also the only one who knew the corridor had a secondary passage. A murmur passed through the nearest nobles again, sharper this time. From above, Lord Renshaw closed his eyes briefly, as if confirming a conclusion he had feared for years. Leora's voice hardened. And your brother was already dying before I ever reached that corridor. The hall froze at those words. Even the Duke did not respond immediately. Something inside the atmosphere cracked open, not loudly, but enough to change every certainty in the room. The sealed corridor was no longer just a place, it was becoming a question, and every answer was now within reach. The silence inside the ballroom collapsed all at once. Voices erupted across the marble chamber as nobles leaned toward one another in disbelief, their whispers colliding like storm winds trapped beneath the palace roof. Captain Merrick Salt immediately stepped forward again, placing himself between the crowd and Leora before panic could spread further. The Duke never looked away from her. You expect this court to believe my brother was dying before the fire began. His voice remained calm, but that calmness carried something colder than rage. Leora slowly lowered her fan. I expect nothing from this court anymore. That answer unsettled him more than denial would have. Lord Renshaw descended from the upper gallery with measured steps, his silver cane striking softly against the floor. Age had bent his posture slightly, yet authority still followed him like shadow. No further discussion here, he announced. Seal the ballroom. At once, palace guards moved toward every entrance. Massive doors closed one after another with deep metallic echoes. Guests who had arrived expecting music and courtship now found themselves trapped inside a growing investigation tied to one of the kingdom's oldest scandals. Lady Selphira Orne pressed closer to a cluster of frightened noblewomen. If the archives were truly open tonight, then someone from the crown authorized this before the ball even began. Which means, whispered Taryn Blythe nearby, someone knew she would return. Those words spread quickly. Leora heard them too. For the first time since entering the palace, Uncertainty crossed her face, completely uncovered. She turned toward the Duke. "You arranged this gathering?" "No," he answered, "but I suspected you would come once the winter registry was restored." A faint crease appeared between her brows. She understood immediately. The registry contained inheritance transfers, marriage contracts, birth records, and sealed estate claims. Anyone attempting to reclaim a hidden identity would eventually appear within palace records, which meant he had been waiting. Not for days, for years. The realization struck harder than the accusation. The Duke finally motioned toward the eastern corridor. "Walk." The command carried through the hall without force. Yet everyone understood it could not be ignored. Leora moved first. The guards followed several paces behind, while nobles parted silently to clear a path. The chandeliers above flickered faintly as cold draughts crept through ancient stone passages. Somewhere beyond the ballroom, distant bells continued ringing from the lower palace levels. Restricted protocol remained active. As they entered the eastern corridor, the noise of the ballroom faded behind them. Only footsteps remained now. Leora walked steadily beside the Duke, though tension sharpened every breath between them. Portraits of long-dead rulers watched from gilded walls while servants vanished into side passages to avoid witnessing whatever was unfolding. "You should have let the dead remain buried," she said quietly. The Duke glanced toward her. "You speak as if only one grave matters." A shadow crossed her expression. 3 years ago, rumors had spread through the kingdom after the West Wing fire. Some claimed Calric Valecourt had uncovered treason within noble ranks. Others believed he had been murdered over inheritance disputes tied to the duchy. But none of those whispers explained why Leora vanished the same night, nor why the Duke spent years refusing every request to permanently seal the investigation. They descended a narrow staircase lit by iron lanterns. Captain Merrick remained close behind, while 2 additional guards joined them near the lower vault entrance. One carried a ring of ancient keys, large enough to lock entire wings of the palace. When the final stair ended, a heavy iron door waited ahead. The West Archive corridor. Leora stopped walking. The Duke noticed immediately, afraid. Her eyes remained fixed on the door. No, angry. That answer surprised him. A guard unlocked the first bolt. Metal scraped loudly through stone silence. Then another lock was released. Then another. Each sound seemed to awaken memories buried beneath years of forced distance. Lord Renshaw eventually reached them from behind, breathing harder from the stairs. Once this corridor opens, all statements become official records under Crown authority. The Duke nodded once. Leora remained still. The final lock opened. The heavy door groaned inward. Cold air spilled out immediately, carrying the faint scent of ash that stone walls had never fully released. The corridor beyond remained exactly as it had been preserved after the fire. Burn marks scarred portions of the ceiling. Torn drapery still hung near shattered sconces. Dust covered the floor, except where recent footsteps disturbed it. Recent footsteps. Captain Merrick noticed first. Someone entered here recently. Every guard immediately tensed. The Duke's gaze hardened as he examined the floor. Fresh tracks crossed the dust toward the sealed chamber at the corridor's far end. Leora whispered something under her breath. "What did you say?" he asked. She swallowed slowly. That door was never supposed to open again. Without warning, one of the lantern flames flickered violently. A sharp sound echoed deeper ahead, not stone settling. Movement. The guards drew weapons instantly. "Who is there?" Captain Merrick barked. No answer came. The Duke stepped forward first, despite every protest from his guards. Leora followed before anyone could stop her, her pace suddenly urgent. "You cannot go inside," Merrick warned. But she ignored him completely. The corridor narrowed as they approached the burned chamber where Calric Veilcourt had died. Old scorch marks blackened the walls near the entrance. Melted metal still clung to the frame of a ruined chandelier, lying collapsed across one side of the floor. Leora slowed. The Duke watched her carefully now, not as a suspect, as someone reliving something dangerous. "You remember this place too clearly," he said. Her eyes flicked toward him sharply. "Because I watched your brother bleed here." The words landed like a blade. Captain Merrick stiffened behind them, while Lord Renshaw closed his eyes briefly. The Duke's jaw tightened. "Then tell me why you ran." Leora looked toward the chamber ahead rather than answering. "Because someone else was already inside when I arrived." A sudden crash exploded from within the burned room. Everyone surged forward at once. A shadow darted across the far side of the chamber. "Stop!" Merrick shouted. Guards rushed after the figure while the Duke entered the ruined room. Directly behind them, broken furniture still littered the chamber, exactly as it had after the fire, years ago. Torn curtains swayed near cracked windows where winter air slipped through shattered glass. Then the fleeing figure stumbled. A guard seized him hard against the wall. The man struggled wildly before Captain Merrick tore away the hood, covering his face. Gasps broke instantly across the chamber. Taran Blythe, the young nobleman from the ballroom, looked pale with terror. The Duke stepped toward him slowly. "Why are you here?" "I can explain," Taran stammered desperately. "Then explain quickly." Taran's breathing shook uncontrollably. "I was paid." By whom? Before he could answer, Leora suddenly moved toward the far side of the room, her attention locked onto something near the burned fireplace. The Duke followed her gaze. Partially hidden beneath collapsed timber rested a small silver crest blackened by soot. House Veilcourt. Calric's personal insignia. Leora stared at it in horror. "No." The Duke picked it up carefully. The back side carried fresh scratches. Not old damage. Recent markings. 3 carved lines crossed through the family seal. Lord Renshaw's face drained of color the moment he saw it. "What does this mean?" Captain Merrick demanded. The old advisor answered quietly. "It means the traitor within the court is still alive." A terrible silence followed. Then Taran Blythe began shaking harder against the guards restraining him. "You do not understand," he whispered. The Duke stepped toward him. "Then help me understand." Taran's eyes darted wildly toward the corridor behind them, as if terrified someone else remained nearby. "They said she would return eventually," he confessed breathlessly. "They said the lavender scent would bring everything back." Leora stared at him. Who said that? But Taran's fear suddenly deepened into something worse. Recognition. He looked directly past them, toward the corridor entrance. The Duke turned instantly. A figure stood there beneath the lantern light. Tall. Motionless. Face hidden beneath a dark traveling cloak. One gloved hand rested against the stone archway, as if the stranger had been calmly observing them for some time already. No guard had heard the approach. No footsteps echoed. The entire corridor seemed to freeze around that silent figure. Then the stranger spoke. "You should have let the dead keep their secrets." And Leora's face lost all color. The corridor erupted into motion. Captain Merrick drew his sword instantly, while guards surged toward the cloaked stranger, standing beneath the archway. Yet the figure did not retreat. He remained perfectly still, as lantern light trembled across the stone walls around him. Leora stepped backward, so suddenly her shoulder struck the burned mantle behind her. The Duke noticed fear, not the fear of arrest, not the fear of exposure, recognition. "You know him," Ryson said sharply. The stranger slowly removed one glove, revealing a pale scar stretching across his wrist like a rope burn healed badly over time. Lord Renshaw's face tightened the moment he saw it. "No," the old advisor whispered. "It cannot be." The figure lowered his hood. Several nobles gasped at once. The man standing there looked older than memory, yet unmistakably familiar. Dark hair streaked faintly with silver, framed a face marked by exhaustion rather than age. One side of his jaw carried a thin scar disappearing beneath his collar. Taran Blythe nearly collapsed against the guards restraining him. "You told me he was dead," Taran choked out. The stranger ignored him completely. His eyes settled only on Leora. 3 years of silence seemed to gather between them inside that ruined chamber. The Duke's expression darkened. "Name yourself," the man answered calmly. "Bastian Vale." The name struck the room like thunder. Captain Merrick stared hard at him. "Calric's personal secretary? Formally, that is impossible," Lord Renshaw snapped. "Your carriage was found overturned near the eastern cliffs after the fire." Bastien gave a faint smile without warmth. Many things buried after that night were never truly dead. The Duke stepped forward slowly, every movement controlled. "You vanished the same night my brother died." "And so did she," Bastien replied, glancing briefly toward Leora. The accusation in that glance carried years beneath it. Leora's voice finally broke through the silence. "You should not have come back here. Neither should you." The air between them sharpened instantly. Ryson noticed every detail now. The tension, the unfinished history, the guilt neither could fully hide. "You were together that night," he said. Neither answered immediately. That silence answered enough. Captain Merrick tightened his grip on his sword. "Your Grace, allow me to place both under formal arrest until inquiry concludes." "No," Ryson said immediately. The captain looked stunned. The Duke's eyes never left Bastien. If he wanted to flee, he would not have revealed himself. Bastien folded his hands behind his back calmly. At last, someone in this palace remembers how to think before swinging steel. Merrick took a threatening step forward, but Ryson raised one hand slightly. "Speak," the Duke ordered. "Now." Bastien's expression hardened. Calric was poisoned before the fire ever began. The chamber froze. Even the lantern flames seemed still. Lord Renshaw gripped his cane harder. "Poison?" Bastien nodded once. "Slow-acting, difficult to trace. It weakened him over several weeks." Ryson's jaw tightened visibly. "You expect me to believe no physician noticed?" "They noticed," Bastien replied. "They were paid to remain blind." Leora looked toward the floor briefly, pain crossing her face before she controlled it again. The Duke saw that too. "You knew," he said quietly. Her eyes lifted toward him. "I discovered it too late." Those words carried no performance now, only regret. Taran suddenly struggled against the guards again. "This was not what I agreed to." "Silence," Captain Merrick barked. But Taran shook violently. They said the Duke would blame her forever, and the matter would stay buried. "That was the arrangement?" Ryson turned sharply toward him. "Who made that arrangement?" Taran swallowed hard. Before he could answer, Bastien spoke first. "Lord Halvan." A ripple of shock tore through the room. Lord Halvan sat among the king's highest financial advisers. Wealthy, influential, untouchable. Ryson's expression turned colder than stone. "You accuse a royal minister of murder." "I accuse him of survival," Bastien answered. The Duke moved closer until only a few steps separated them. "Then explain why my brother trusted him, because Calric trusted too easily." That answer struck harder than anger. For years, Ryson had protected the memory of his younger brother as honorable and intelligent. Hearing him reduced to vulnerable carelessness ignited something dangerous behind his eyes. Bastien noticed immediately. "You want the truth," he continued. "Then stop worshipping the dead long enough to see them clearly." Captain Merrick stepped between them before the confrontation escalated further. "Enough," the captain warned, but Leora suddenly moved forward. "No," she said. "He is right." Everyone turned toward her. The chamber felt smaller now, tighter beneath the weight of revelation. Leora's voice remained steady, despite the storm around her. Calric discovered irregular transfers moving through the western trade routes. Funds were disappearing from military shipments before reaching the northern provinces. Lord Renshaw frowned deeply. That investigation was sealed by the Crown itself. Because the theft reached inside the Crown, Bastien replied. Ryson looked between them slowly. You were both helping him. Yes, Leora answered. The word landed heavily. At last, pieces began shifting into place. Not lovers hiding scandal, witnesses hiding conspiracy. Yet something still remained unfinished. Ryson saw it in her eyes. You still have not explained why you disappeared. Leora's composure finally cracked slightly, because that question carried more pain than accusation. Bastien looked toward her briefly before answering instead. Because someone threatened the child. The room went silent again. Ryson stared at him. What child? Leora closed her eyes, only for a moment, but long enough for truth to arrive before words did. The Duke's breathing slowed dangerously. Leora. She could not meet his gaze now. Lord Renshaw looked genuinely shaken. Captain Merrick lowered his sword slightly without realizing it. Even Taran stopped struggling. Bastien spoke carefully this time. The child was born weeks after the fire. Ryson's face lost all expression. A silence deeper than anger settled across him. Leora finally lifted her eyes toward his, and every wall she had carried for years seemed one breath away from collapsing entirely. I tried to tell you, she whispered. That night in the corridor before the fire spread, I tried. The Duke stared at her, as though hearing a voice from another lifetime. 3 years. 3 years believing betrayal destroyed everything. 3 years believing she vanished willingly. 3 years never knowing she carried his child while running from people powerful enough to erase entire bloodlines. Ryson stepped backward once, not from weakness, from impact. Where is the child? He asked quietly. Leora hesitated. That hesitation changed everything again. Bastien's eyes narrowed instantly. Leora, she swallowed hard. Before she could answer, rapid footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. A palace messenger appeared breathless near the entrance. Your Grace, he gasped, bowing hurriedly. The Royal Council requests immediate audience. Lord Halvan has vanished from the palace. Captain Merrick cursed under his breath. Ryson's expression darkened instantly. Seal every gate. We already attempted it, the messenger replied nervously. One guard was found unconscious near the eastern carriage passage. Bastien looked toward the Duke sharply. He knows we opened the archives. Lord Renshaw turned pale. Then the records are no longer safe. Ryson's mind moved quickly now. Merrick, secure the archives personally. No one enters without my order. The captain nodded immediately and departed with 2 guards. The Duke turned back toward Leora. We finish this tonight. Her face tightened slightly. You believe the truth still survives inside this palace? No, he answered. But I believe fear does. That answer unsettled even Bastien. The messenger hesitated before speaking again. There is another matter, Your Grace. Ryson looked toward him impatiently. The young man swallowed hard. A carriage arrived at the northern courtyard less than an hour ago under false registry papers. And? The messenger's voice lowered. There was a child inside asking for Lady Leora. Every sound vanished from the room. Leora's face was completely drained of color. Bastien turned toward her sharply. You said she was hidden. She was, Leora whispered. Ryson's pulse hammered once against his throat. She? Leora looked toward him slowly, and this time there was no hiding left. Our daughter. The words shattered through every remaining barrier between past and present. Before anyone could react further, another sound echoed through the corridor. A scream. Not distant. Close, very close. The messenger spun toward the entrance in panic, as guards shouted somewhere, Beyond the stone halls, Captain Merrick's voice thundered from outside. "Protect the child." Then came the unmistakable sound of steel colliding violently against steel. Leora moved first. She rushed toward the corridor without hesitation, while Bastien followed instantly behind her. Ryson caught up within seconds as chaos erupted beyond the archive halls. Guards sprinted through the palace lower wing, while servants fled in terror against the walls. A body crashed against the corridor floor ahead. One of the palace guards, bleeding heavily, Captain Merrick emerged from the smoke-filled passage beyond him, with a sword drawn, fury blazing across his face. "They are taking her," he shouted. Ryson's expression turned murderous. "Who?" But before Merrick could answer, a child's frightened cry echoed through the palace darkness, and Leora ran toward it without stopping. Leora raced through the smoke-filled corridor, with her skirts gathered tightly in one hand, while terrified servants pressed themselves against the walls to avoid the chaos surging through the lower palace halls. The frightened cry echoed again somewhere ahead, thinner now, trembling beneath the sound of clashing steel. Her daughter, nothing else mattered. Ryson followed only a step behind her, his expression sharpened into something colder than fury. Captain Merrick stormed ahead with a drawn sword, while guards spilled through branching corridors, searching for the attackers who had breached the palace. A second guard collapsed near the eastern stairwell, clutching a wound across his shoulder. "They went toward the carriage gates," he gasped painfully. Merrick cursed and continued forward. Bastien caught up beside Leora. This should not have happened. No one outside the Valley Refuge knew where she was hidden. Leora looked at him with panic burning openly in her eyes. Someone followed the registry transfer. "No," Bastien replied immediately. "This was planned before tonight." Ryson heard every word. The realization struck him harder with every passing moment. Someone had waited years for this exact night. Someone knew Leora would return to court eventually. Someone knew the child existed. The palace erupted further ahead. A servant screamed as armed men burst through a side passage wearing dark travel cloaks instead of military uniforms. One attacker grabbed the servant violently and hurled him aside before spotting the approaching guards. "Stop them!" Merrick roared. Steel collided instantly. The corridor transformed into chaos. One attacker lunged toward Leora, but Ryson intercepted him before the blade could reach her. The Duke struck the man hard against the wall, seized his weapon, and drove him backward into a shattered lantern stand. Flames burst across scattered oil. Smoke thickened rapidly. Leora pushed forward through the confusion, despite Bastien trying to hold her back. I heard her voice. "She is close." A small figure suddenly darted from the far corridor intersection. A child, tiny shoes, striking marble desperately. She could not have been older than 3 winters. Fear filled her wide eyes as she ran blindly through the smoke, while another cloaked figure pursued directly behind her. "Malin!" Leora cried. The child turned instantly at the sound of her mother's voice. That single moment changed everything for Ryson, because he saw himself in the child immediately, not in her expression, in the eyes. The same pale grey eyes carried by every member of House Valecourt for generations. The attacker seized the child before she could run farther. Malin screamed. Leora surged forward recklessly, but Bastien caught her arm before she reached the blade aimed toward the little girl's throat. "Stay back," the cloaked man warned. Captain Merrick moved carefully through the smoke with sword raised. "Release the child, and you leave breathing." The man laughed once, harsh and ugly. "You still think this palace belongs to the Duke?" Ryson stepped into clearer view through the drifting smoke. "Who sent you? Men richer than dukes." The answer alone confirmed enough. Lord Halvan. Ryson's jaw tightened dangerously. The child struggled against the attacker's grip, frightened tears streaking across her face. Yet, even while trembling, she looked toward Leora instead of crying harder. "Mama," she whispered shakily. That sound hit Ryson harder than any blade could have. Leora's voice broke openly now. "Please do not hurt her." The attacker tightened his grip, then ordered the Duke to step aside. Ryson's gaze remained fixed on the man. "You entered my palace carrying steel against a child. There is nowhere in this kingdom you survive after tonight." The man smiled beneath his hood. "That depends who reaches the throne first." A sudden realization crossed Lord Renshaw's face as he finally caught up through the corridor behind them. "The council chamber," he breathed. "Halvan is not fleeing. He is moving against the crown." Everything sharpened instantly. Bastien swore under his breath. Then tonight was never about silencing witnesses. "No," Ryson answered coldly. "It was about removing anyone connected to Calric's investigation before power changes hands. The attacker shifted uneasily. That small movement was enough. Captain Merrick struck first. He hurled a dagger across the corridor with terrifying precision. The blade buried itself deep into the attacker's shoulder. The man screamed and released Malin instantly. Leora rushed forward. Ryson intercepted the wounded attacker before escape became possible, slamming him violently against the stone wall while guards swarmed the corridor. Malin collided into her mother's arms, trembling uncontrollably. Leora dropped to her knees, holding the child tightly against her chest while trying desperately to calm her breathing. Bastien positioned himself protectively beside them as smoke thickened around the shattered lantern oil. Ryson kept the attacker pinned hard against the wall. "Where is Halvan going?" The wounded man laughed weakly, despite the blood running down his sleeve. "You are already too late." Merrick pressed his sword against the man's throat. "Answer carefully." "He has supporters inside the Royal Council already prepared to swear loyalty once the king is declared unfit." Lord Renshaw turned pale with horror. "Madness." "No," the attacker whispered. "Preparation." Ryson's grip tightened. "How many?" "Enough." Those words settled heavily across the corridor, because everyone understood what they meant. This was no hidden conspiracy anymore. It was an attempted seizure of power. Malin slowly lifted her face from Leora's shoulder, frightened eyes searching the smoke-filled hall. Her gaze landed on Ryson for the first time fully. The Duke felt his chest tighten unexpectedly. The child studied him quietly, despite her fear. Then softly, almost uncertainly, she asked, "Are you the man from Mama's painting?" The corridor went still. Leora froze completely. Bastien looked away immediately. Ryson stared at the little girl as if the world had shifted beneath him again. "What painting?" he asked quietly. Malin pointed toward her mother. "The one she keeps hidden beside the window." Leora's eyes closed briefly in defeat. Captain Merrick slowly lowered his sword, suddenly feeling as though he were witnessing something far too personal for soldiers and bloodshed. Ryson looked toward Leora. For years he imagined betrayal, abandonment, cold disappearance. Yet, somewhere far from court and titles, she had kept his portrait hidden beside a child who carried his eyes. The realization struck with painful force. But there was no time to breathe through it. Another palace bell thundered overhead. 3 rapid strikes. Emergency succession protocol. Lord Renshaw's expression hardened instantly. "The council chamber has been seized." Ryson released the wounded attacker violently. Guards restrained the man immediately. "Merrick," the Duke ordered, "take him below and secure every archive document connected to Calric's case." The captain nodded sharply. Bastien looked toward the upper corridors. "If Halvan controls the council, he controls palace declarations. And if he controls declarations, Lord Renshaw added grimly. He can accuse anyone of treason before dawn. Including the Duke. Rhysand turned toward Leora and Malin. For one brief moment, the war inside him became visible. Rage, relief, grief, love buried beneath years of bitterness. Then duty reclaimed his expression. You both remain under my protection now. Leora stared at him carefully. Protection from whom? The Duke answered without hesitation. Everyone. That answer unsettled her more than anger would have. Malin clung tightly to her mother, while smoke drifted toward the ceiling arches above them. Somewhere deeper, inside the palace, bells continued ringing, as nobles panicked through sealed halls. Lord Renshaw straightened painfully beside them. Your Grace, if Halvan reaches the royal seal before us, he can condemn House Velcourt publicly before sunrise. Rhysand nodded once. Then we move now, Bastien frowned. You are walking directly into a council trap. Yes, Rhysand answered calmly. But now they know the child survived. That changes their urgency. Leora slowly stood, holding Malin close against her side. You cannot take her into the council wing. I will not leave her behind again. Those words escaped him before he could stop them. Silence followed immediately. Leora looked at him differently after that. Not with forgiveness, not yet. But the wall between them shifted slightly for the first time since returning. Captain Merrick approached again after issuing orders to the guards. The lower gates are secured. Several council supporters have already attempted to escape already. Names? Rhysand asked. Lord Veridon, Magistrate Solmere. 2 treasury officials. Lord Renshaw cursed quietly. Halvan infected half the court. No, Bastien replied darkly. Half the court infected itself willingly. A distant explosion suddenly shook the palace. Dust rained from the corridor ceiling. Everyone turned sharply toward the sound. The western tower, Merrick said immediately. Another guard rushed toward them breathlessly. Fire has broken out near the council chambers. Rhysand's eyes hardened instantly. Fire again, just like 3 years earlier. Someone was destroying evidence. Leora recognized the realization crossing his face. Halvan burns everything connected to Calric. The Duke turned toward Captain Merrick. Get them safely to the northern sanctuary rooms. But Leora stepped forward immediately. No, Rhysand looked at her sharply. If he is destroying records, she said, then the ledger still exists. Bastien understood instantly. The transfer ledger from the mud and Russness. Lord Renshaw's breathing quickened. Calric hid it before the fire spread. Leora nodded slowly. He told me where. The Duke stared at her. You never said this before. Because your brother made me swear no one would know unless the crown itself became compromised. Another distant crash thundered through the palace above them. Time was disappearing rapidly. Rhysand made his decision instantly. Then you are coming with me. Captain Merrick frowned. Your Grace, the council wing is becoming a battlefield. Then we end it before dawn. He turned toward Malin then, and for the first time his voice softened completely. Can you be brave a little longer? The child looked frightened still. Yet something steady existed inside her, despite the chaos around them. She nodded slowly. Rhysand felt something inside his chest break quietly at the sight, because she had his brother's courage, and Leora's eyes. Then another bell rang through the palace darkness. Not warning, declaration, the royal succession horn. Someone inside the council chamber had just claimed authority over the kingdom. The succession horn echoed through the palace, like a sentence being written in real time. Each note deeper than the last. Each vibration confirming that the royal council chamber was no longer in discussion, but in control of someone who had already begun rewriting authority. Rhysand stood still for only a breath. Then he moved. Seal every internal passage leading to the council wing. he ordered sharply. Captain Merrick reacted instantly, shouting commands to nearby guards who broke into urgent motion through the smoke-stained corridors. The palace that had once been a place of ceremony was now shifting into a fortified battlefield of stone and loyalty. Lord Renshaw followed close behind Ryson, his voice strained. If Halvan holds the council seal, he can issue royal decrees under emergency succession clauses. Bastian's expression darkened, which means arrests can be made without trial. Leora tightened her hold on Malin as they walked quickly through a narrowing passage, lit by trembling lanterns. The child buried her face against her mother's shoulder again, but her eyes kept flicking toward the Duke as if trying to understand why the world she was just beginning to know had become so unstable. Ryson noticed. He slowed slightly, so he walked beside them. "You will stay close," he said quietly. Leora did not answer immediately. Her focus remained ahead, but her voice came softer than before. "If we enter that chamber, there is no going back to ignorance." "There was never ignorance," he replied. That answer made her glance at him briefly. The corridors ahead grew colder as they approached the central council wing. The architecture changed, shifting from decorative marble to reinforced stone, carved with generations of royal authority. Every step felt heavier, as if the building itself resisted their approach. Captain Merrick returned quickly from ahead. "Council entrance is guarded. Not palace soldiers, private men." Ryson's jaw tightened. "Mercenaries." "Yes," Merrick confirmed. "Professionally trained. They will not hesitate." Bastian looked toward the Duke. If Halvan has hired an outside force, then he is preparing for permanent control. Lord Renshaw's voice dropped. He intends to declare a new governing council before dawn. Leora stopped walking for a moment. Malin lifted her head in slightly. "Mama, are we safe now?" The question struck harder than any blade. Leora knelt briefly, brushing the child's hair back with trembling care. "Stay close to me, always." Then she stood again, her expression changing. Not fear. Decision. "This way," she said. Bastian frowned. "That path leads beneath the archive foundation." "I know," Leora replied. "That is why we are taking it." Ryson watched her carefully. For the first time, she was not reacting to the palace. She was navigating it. They turned sharply into a hidden side passage, partially concealed behind a shifting wall panel known only to select court historians and senior advisors. Dust filled the air as they descended narrow stone steps leading beneath the main structure. The sound of the palace above faded quickly, replaced by silence. Then the faint echo of distant shouting. Captain Merrick followed last, ensuring the passage remained secure before the panel sealed behind them. The underground corridor was older than the current dynasty. Stone markings along the walls indicated forgotten council reforms and ancient disputes that had once shaped the kingdom. Lord Renshaw exhaled slowly. "Few remember these tunnels exist." Bastian glanced around. Calric did. Ryson's gaze sharpened at that name again. They moved deeper. At the end of the passage stood a circular chamber, reinforced with iron bands. At its center rested a sealed pedestal, bearing the Vale Court insignia etched into its surface. Leora stepped forward immediately. "This is it," she said. Ryson followed her. "The ledger." She nodded once. "Hidden beneath royal witness protection." Captain Merrick examined the pedestal. It is sealed by a dual-key structure. Lord Renshaw stepped closer, inspecting markings. One key held by the Crown Archive, the other only Vale Court bloodline authority. Silence followed. Ryson turned slightly toward Leora. "You never told me this existed." Her voice was quiet. "Because I was never supposed to use it." Bastian's expression darkened. Calric feared Halvan even then. Ryson placed his hand on the pedestal seal. "Then we open it now." A sudden sound echoed from above, not distant anymore, Close, footsteps. Captain Merrick immediately raised his sword. They followed us. The passage entrance trembled as distant impacts struck the hidden entryway. Someone was trying to force it open. Rysons did not move away from the pedestal. "Hold them," he ordered Merrick. The captain nodded once and rushed back toward the passage entrance. Bastien turned toward Leora. "We do not have much time." She stepped closer to the pedestal. "Give me your hand." Ryson looked at her briefly, then placed his hand beside hers on the seal. The moment their hands aligned, the pedestal reacted. A faint glow appeared along the etched Valecourt insignia. Lord Renshaw's eyes widened. "It is responding to blood recognition." Bastien stepped back slightly. "Then it truly is locked to lineage." The seal shifted. A deep mechanical click echoed through the chamber. Above them, shouting intensified. Captain Merrick's voice rang out. "They are breaking through!" Another strike shook the tunnel. Dust fell from the ceiling. The pedestal began to open slowly, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside lay a thick ledger bound in dark leather, reinforced with iron corners. Ryson reached for it first. The moment his fingers touched it, a sharp sound echoed from the passage behind them. A blade struck a stone. Then another. Captain Merrick shouted again, "Fall back." Ryson pulled the ledger free instantly. Leora stepped back as Bastien moved between them and the passage entrance. But it was already too late. Mercenaries poured into the underground chamber. 6 of them. Armed, efficient, silent. One stepped forward, his voice calm. "Hand over the ledger." Ryson tightened his grip. "You are trespassing beneath royal authority." The mercenary tilted his head. "Royal authority is changing." Captain Merrick reappeared behind them, blood on his sleeve, but still standing. "They are trained to ignore negotiation." Ryson handed the ledger to Leora instantly. "Protect it." She hesitated. "You are not taking this alone." "I am not alone," he replied. Then he stepped forward. The mercenaries moved at once. Steel clashed violently in the confined chamber as Captain Merrick engaged 2 attackers simultaneously. Bastien grabbed a fallen blade and defended Leora and Malin near the pedestal alcove, while Lord Renshaw struggled to maintain footing amid the chaos. Ryson fought with controlled precision, striking one mercenary back against the stone wall before disarming another. The ledger remained in Leora's hands as she pressed Malin behind the pedestal for protection. One mercenary broke through toward her. Bastien intercepted him immediately, driving him back with force. "Move!" Bastien shouted. Leora shifted away with Malin just as another attacker lunged toward them. Ryson saw it. He moved faster than the strike. The mercenary's blade barely missed Leora as the Duke caught the attacker's wrist and twisted sharply until the weapon dropped to the ground. A brutal strike followed, sending the man collapsing backward. Captain Merrick finished his opponent seconds later. The chamber fell briefly into chaotic silence. 3 mercenaries remained alive, but disoriented. Ryson stepped forward, breathing controlled but sharp. "Who sent you?" One of them spat blood onto the stone. "You already know." Ryson's eyes darkened. "Halvern." The mercenary gave no denial. That was answer enough. Lord Renshaw looked shaken. "He is accelerating everything." Bastien turned toward Leora. "We leave now. This chamber will be breached again." Leora nodded quickly and secured the ledger against her chest. Malin clung tightly to her side. As they moved toward the tunnel exit, a distant sound echoed again from above ground. This time not footsteps. Drums, military drums. Ryson stopped for a moment. "That is not Palace Guard protocol." Captain Merrick frowned. "It is an invasion formation rhythm." Silence followed. Then Bastien spoke quietly. "Halvern has opened the outer gates." Ryson's expression hardened completely. "He has brought outside forces into the capital." Lord Renshaw looked devastated. "Then the kingdom is already divided." Leora tightened her grip on Malin. "We still have the ledger," she said firmly. Ryson looked at her. "For now," he agreed. They moved quickly through the tunnel exit toward a secondary passage leading back into the upper palace structure. As they climbed, the sound of conflict above intensified. Steel, shouts, breaking stone. The palace was no longer under control. It was collapsing into factions. When they finally emerged into a narrow upper corridor, smoke greeted them immediately. Captain Merrick looked ahead sharply. "Council wing is fully engaged." Ryson adjusted his stance. "Then we go straight through it." Leora stared at him. "That is suicide." "No," he replied. "That is the conclusion." A sudden explosion shook the corridor nearby, sending fragments of stone across the floor. Malin cried out in fear. Ryson immediately knelt slightly toward her. "Stay behind me, no matter what." The child nodded quickly. Leora looked at him differently again, not as a duke, not as a man of court, but as someone who had just chosen her child above everything else in his world. Bastien stepped forward. "If we reach the council chamber, we end Halvan's claim in one move." Ryson stood. "Yes," he said, "but only if we survive long enough to speak." Then another sound rose ahead, heavy doors opening, and a voice echoing through the corridor from the council wing itself. "We declare a new order in the name of the crown." Ryson tightened his grip on his sword. The final confrontation had already begun. The council chamber doors burst open beneath the force of clashing steel, and smoke rolled across the marble floor as Rasan led the charge straight into the heart of the palace uprising. Inside, chaos had already consumed the royal chamber. Council banners lay torn across the floor. Nobles shouted over one another, while armed mercenaries guarded the raised council platform, where Lord Halvan stood beside the royal succession seal. The old minister no longer looked like a careful advisor hiding behind court etiquette. Tonight, power had stripped away the mask completely. He looked prepared for war. Several council's members immediately recoiled when they saw Ryson enter alive. Others looked afraid for entirely different reasons, because Leora carried the ledger openly against her chest. Halvan noticed it instantly. His expression darkened. "So the dead secretary failed me after all," he said calmly. Bastien stepped forward beside the Duke. "You should have burned more than corridors if you wanted your secrets buried." The chamber tightened around those words. Mercenaries raised weapons immediately, while Captain Merrick positioned guards defensively around Leora and Malin near the chamber entrance. Lord Renshaw moved toward the remaining loyal council members. "You stand inside an unlawful seizure of crown authority. End this madness before blood seals it permanently." Halvan laughed softly. "Blood sealed this kingdom generations ago." He leapt from the council platform. Slowly, his hands folded behind his back, like a man addressing a political debate rather than treason. "You truly believe this realm survives on noble honor," he continued. "Trade routes built these palaces. Military contracts fed your armies. Money decides crowns long before bloodlines pretend otherwise." Ryson's gaze never shifted. "You murdered my brother." Halvan tilted his head slightly. "Your brother endangered stability." Those words shattered the last restraint remaining inside the Duke. Ryson moved forward instantly, but Captain Merrick caught his arm briefly before the confrontation exploded too early. "Not yet," the captain warned quietly. Halvan smiled faintly at the interruption. "There is a problem with House Valecourt. Always emotional when truth becomes unpleasant." Leora stepped forward suddenly. "You poisoned Calric because he discovered the missing military funds." Halvan looked toward her calmly. "No, I poisoned him because he lacked the wisdom to ignore what powerful men require." The chamber erupted into furious whispers. Several council members backed away from Halvan completely now. Even some mercenaries looked unsettled, hearing the confession spoken so openly. Ryson's voice dropped lower than before. "You admit it." "I admit survival," Halvan replied. Then his gaze shifted toward Malin. The entire atmosphere changed instantly, and there stands the final inconvenience. Ryson moved immediately between Halvan and the child, without hesitation. The old minister noticed. A cold smile touched his face. So the rumors were true after all. Leora tightened her grip on the ledger. "You will not touch her." Halvan sighed almost wearily. "You still misunderstand your importance. None of this was ever about affection. The child matters because bloodlines create legitimacy. If House Valecourt survives united, then every financial alliance I built collapses by sunrise." Lord Renshaw stared at him in disbelief. "You planned to fracture the duchy from the beginning." "Yes," Halvan answered simply. "The honesty of evil unsettled the chamber more than lies ever could." Bastien stepped closer. "You murdered Calric because he would expose you." "I removed an obstacle," Halvan corrected. Ryson's restraint finally vanished. He strode forward through the chamber, while mercenaries immediately raised weapons toward him. Captain Tmerek drew his sword again. Palace guards surged into position. Steel filled the chamber from every direction. But Ryson did not stop walking. "You spent 3 years hiding behind courtiers and money," he said coldly. "Tonight you answer as a man." Halvan studied him carefully, then slowly reached for the ceremonial blade resting beside the succession seal. Gasps spread across the council hall. A duel inside the royal chamber meant only one thing. No retreat, no negotiation, only victory or ruin. The old minister descended fully from the platform with surprising steadiness, despite his age. "You want justice?" he asked. "Then earn it without titles protecting you." Captain Merrick moved immediately. "Your Grace, this is beneath you." "No," Ryson answered, without looking away from Halvan. "This ended beneath this palace 3 years ago. Tonight it ends here." The chamber cleared slowly as nobles retreated from the center floor. Smoke drifted beneath the chandeliers overhead, while shattered candlelight flickered across steel. Leora felt Malin clutch her hand tighter. "Mama," the child whispered fearfully. Leora knelt beside her briefly, despite the tension swallowing the chamber. "Do not look away," she said softly. "Some truths must be witnessed completely." Then she stood again. Ryson and Halvan circled slowly across the council floor, while every voice inside the chamber disappeared into silence. The first strike came fast. Halvan lunged with far more skill than anyone expected, driving the ceremonial blade toward Ryson's shoulder. The Duke blocked instantly, steel crashing loudly through the chamber. A second strike followed, then another. Halvan fought like a man who had spent years preparing for the moment. His secrets finally demanded blood. Ryson's countered hard, forcing him backward across the marble floor. Council members watched in stunned silence. This was no noble performance. This was vengeance sharpened over years. Halvan struck again suddenly, twisting his blade low before driving upward toward Ryson's chest. The Duke narrowly turned aside, but the movement sliced across his sleeve. Leora's breath caught. Captain Merrick remained tense beside her. "He is trying to exhaust him." "No," Bastien said quietly. "He is trying to provoke him. Because anger creates mistakes." Ryson understood that too. He steadied his breathing and changed his footing slightly. Then everything shifted. The Duke attacked, not recklessly, precisely. Each strike drove Halvan farther from the succession platform, and closer toward the center chamber windows, overlooking the burning palace grounds outside. Halvan blocked desperately now, his confidence beginning to fracture beneath the sheer force behind Ryson's strikes. "You loved your brother too much," Halvan hissed between clashes. That weakness blinded you. Ryson's expression remained terrifyingly calm. No, he answered. Your greed blinded you. Their blades collided again violently. Then Halvan suddenly shifted tactics. He threw a hidden dagger directly toward Leora. The chamber erupted. Ryson reacted instantly. He abandoned his attack without hesitation and intercepted the dagger mid-flight, with his arm before it could reach her. Pain flashed across his expression briefly. That single moment gave Halvan the opening he wanted. The minister lunged hard toward the succession seal. "If I hold the seal," he shouted wildly, "the council still answers to me." But Bastien moved first. He slammed into Halvan before the minister could reach the platform, sending both men crashing against the council stairs. The chamber exploded into motion again. Mercenaries charged. Guards answered. Steel clashed everywhere. Captain Merrick barked orders while loyal palace soldiers flooded through the side entrances at last. The battle spread across the council chamber in violent bursts of smoke and shouting. Leora rushed toward Ryson immediately. Blood ran from the wound across his arm, but he ignored it completely. "You protected me," she whispered, shaken. His eyes locked onto hers despite the chaos surrounding them. "I failed to protect you once already." Those words struck deeper than the wound itself. For a moment, the years between them seemed to crack apart completely. Then Malin suddenly broke free from the guards surrounding her. "Mama!" The child ran toward them through the chaos just as one wounded mercenary staggered upright nearby, blade still in hand. Leora saw it first. The mercenary raised the weapon toward the child. Everything slowed. Ryson moved immediately, despite the blood running down his arm. He crossed the distance in seconds and seized the attacker before the strike landed, driving him violently against a marble pillar with enough force to send the weapon crashing away across the chamber floor. The mercenary collapsed unconscious. Malin froze in fear. Ryson knelt before her carefully, despite the battle still raging around them. "You are safe," he said softly. The child stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. Then slowly, uncertainly, she reached toward the blood staining his sleeve. "You got hurt because of us." The Duke's expression changed completely at those words. Not anger, not duty, something far deeper. He gently lowered her hand away from the blood. "No, because of them." Behind them, Halvan struggled violently against Bastien and Captain Merrick, as guards finally restrained him fully. "It changes nothing," the minister shouted furiously. "The kingdom still belongs to money." Lord Renshaw stepped forward slowly, grief and fury crossing his aged face together. "No," he answered quietly. "It belongs to the people, forced to survive men like you." The chamber gradually settled into exhausted silence as mercenaries surrendered one after another beneath overwhelming guard numbers. Halvan's power was collapsing in real time. Captain Merrick seized the succession seal from the platform and handed it directly to Lord Renshaw. The old advisor looked toward the remaining council members. "Witness this formally," he declared. "Lord Halvan stands and for conspiracy against the crown, murder of Calric Valecourt, unlawful seizure of council authority, and attempted execution of royal witnesses." One by one, shaken council members bowed their heads in agreement. The nightmare that began 3 years earlier was finally ending. Halvan was dragged from the chamber still, shouting, threats no one listened to anymore. Smoke drifted slowly through broken windows as dawn finally began touching the horizon beyond the palace grounds. For the first time all night, silence returned. Real silence, not fear, not suspense. Peace. Leora looked toward Ryson carefully. The Duke stood near the council platform with blood staining his sleeve and exhaustion weighing visibly across his face. Yet his attention remained fixed only on her and Malin. Years of distance rested between them still. Years of pain, misunderstanding, loss, but none of it mattered more than what survived. Mei Lin slowly stepped closer to him again. "Are you staying now?" she asked quietly. The question nearly broke him. Ryson lowered himself carefully to her height, despite the exhaustion pulling at every movement. "If your mother allows it," he answered softly. Leora felt tears threaten for the first time in years. Not from grief, relief. The child looked between them both, then smiled faintly for the very first time that night. Outside, the palace bells finally changed rhythm. No longer warning, no longer an alarm. Morning bells. A new day rising over a kingdom that almost destroyed itself from within. Ryson slowly stood again and faced Leora fully. "No more disappearing," he said quietly. She looked at him through the fading smoke and answered with the honesty they should have shared years ago. No more silence. The dawn light touched the council chamber windows as House Valecourt stood together at last, not untouched by tragedy, but no longer divided by it either. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, whispers about the woman who wore lavender perfume to hide her scent would spread across the kingdom for generations. But the truth would remain known only to the people who survived that night. "Tell me honestly, if you were Leora, would you have returned to that royal ball after 3 years of silence? Or would you have kept running forever? And do you think Ryson forgave her too easily? Or did they both suffer enough already? Drop your thoughts and tell me which moment shocked you the most in this story."